Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Welcome. You are encouraged to turn on your cameras if you would like to. We'd love to see who's here. Good evening, Harriet and Sandra and Lori, David Katz, Eric Goldman, Judah Rosen, welcome. Good to see you all. We are going to give a few more minutes for people to come to the space, and then we'll start. I know it's always a little awkward, but if you see somebody that you wanted to say something to, you are welcome to do that. Or just greet people in any way that you feel necessary on this Sunday evening.
Hello, Harriet. Hello.
I can't hear you, Harriet.
How are you? Yes.
Hello. I got your message. Looking forward to seeing you. Hello, Lori.
Hi, Sandra.
Eric.
Hi, Rabbi. I don't know if you remember us. Eric and I are the grandparents of Elliot Goldman and Tess Goldman.
It's nice to see you. We're going tonight.
Longtime Beth Sholom members.
Well, we will see if any others show up, and we will have an intimate gathering. If not, oh, here's Jean.
Oh.
All right, another minute. Thank you, Sandra, for talking to some others. That was lovely. Hi, Rabbi Russell. Oh, Rabbi Russell just came in. How did she do that?
I was the backup host, remember?
I have a quick question for Rabbi Mates-Muchin. Are you related to Justin Mates?
I am. He's my brother.
He's your brother. Okay.
Yeah.
My son, hold on, let me, my son went to Lowell. Oh, he was a classmate of Justin's at Lowell. Yeah, Sam Siegel. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I figured you were related. Yeah.
It's a small place, San Francisco, in the Jewish community in San Francisco.
Absolutely. I think, yeah. And I think they were in Hebrew high school together too.
I imagine so.
Yeah. Okay. Nice to see you. I'm looking forward to your talk.
Nice to see you. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Shavua Tov. Welcome. I'm so glad that you are here. I want to make sure everyone realizes that this is being recorded. I think it now tells you when you enter Zoom, but I just wanted to make sure that you realize that so we can share this with others. And I appreciate that questions already started for our guest tonight, and we will hopefully have more time for questions later. I know most of you, but again, I will introduce myself. I'm Adam Lowy. I am the Lifelong Learning Moreh Derech at Congregation Beth Sholom. I am in Big Bear Lake, and so I'm in this funny room that has snowboard art behind me, and it just happens to say pray for snow, but it looks like it just says pray, which is pretty, I think in some ways very appropriate. And I have the ambient light. And this is just how it's going, but thank goodness for quality internet connection so we can have this event no matter where we are. So I'm so glad you're here. Oh, here comes Ruth. I wanted to remind everybody that this speaker series is possible because Beth Sholom is committed to becoming a more welcoming, more inclusive place. And B, that we received a grant from the Jewish Community Federation to do organizational change work in the in the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I include racism and anti-racism in that as well as part of our work. So it's really great that you're here and to hear our guest tonight, who is Rabbi Jackie Mates-Muchin. And I'm going to introduce her formally, and then we're going to hand it off to her to lead us in a bit of a presentation, and then create some space for us to ask some questions. So, Rabbi Mates-Muchin is the senior rabbi of Temple Sinai in Oakland, California. Rabbi Mates-Muchin focuses her efforts in serving her community through worship, pastoral care, social justice work, and encouraging the recognition of the vast diversity within the Jewish community. As the first Chinese American rabbi, she has spoken broadly on the changing nature of the American Jewish community and how it established Jewish institutions can become more inclusive. She is actively engaged in the general East Bay community as well through interfaith and other organizational work. Nationally, Rabbi Mates-Muchin served as a Central Conference of American Rabbis representative to the board of the Union for Reform Judaism. She was ordained from Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion in New York. After 3 years as the assistant rabbi at Temple Beth Zion in Buffalo, New York, she came to Temple Sinai as the associate rabbi and became senior rabbi in 2015. She is married to her husband, Jonathan Mates-Muchin, and together they have 4 children. Rabbi.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Adam, for inviting me. Thank you to Rabbi Russell and to Diane Tobin, who also did the original outreach. I really appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you to all of you who are here. When we originally decided on this date, I did not realize we'd be up against Simone Biles and Katie Ledecky. So I appreciate you. Hit the TiVos, quick, record it.
It's like, oh, I have to go.
Exactly. So I appreciate so much all of you being here. And I'm sure that if we do play some, hey, do you know, we will have lots of great crossovers in that I'm from San Francisco originally. And I was telling Adam, I think the last time I was in Beth Sholom, that was the old building for a friend's bat mitzvah when I was 13, so late 80s. I'm gonna share my screen. So my goal for today is just to be able to share a little bit about my story, to talk a little bit about where I came from and how I think or my story is a piece of how we should think about, or how we can start to think about Jewish diversity in the United States today, where we're going, and I think it's exciting in a lot of ways, and I'll share with you my perspective on that. So my story in the United States begins with my great-great-grandparents in some cases, and my great-grandparents on the other side. My grandmother's parents came to this country in 1880 and 1881, just before the Chinese Exclusion Act. They were actually young children. It was very common at that time because they had come for economic opportunity, but had left a lot of family in the old country to go back and forth. So some of them had gone back and forth a bit. And my great-great-grandfather, who was married to the older woman of these 2 women, had first come to California in 1887. He went back, got married, had children, and then wound up coming back. These 2 documents here that you just see a section of them are the documents for my great-great-grandmother and my great-grandmother when they came over in 1910. And what the documents clarify is what kind of work he did, my great-great-grandfather, that he was a merchant of sorts and traded in all kinds of goods that came from China. And therefore, he was able to bring his family over. So the younger woman in this is my great-grandmother, who married this gentleman. This is his paperwork, and he came over in 1907. The reason I'm sharing this too is that's a picture of him when he came over. This is the document that says that he is an exception to the Chinese Exclusion Act because he was a tea dealer. So the Chinese Exclusion Act was primarily to keep Chinese laborers out. So merchants and tea dealers and those kinds of folks were able to come in, and that's where he gets his paperwork. This is probably a familiar street to some of you, if not all of you, Waverly Place in San Francisco. So both of my grandparents were born in this country. My grandfather grew up until he was a teenager in Sacramento. My grandmother grew up in San Francisco. And when my grandfather was serving in the Army in World War II, my mother lived with her mother and grandmother on Waverly Place. And this is the other side of the story, my father's side of the family. So this is the picture of the outside of their synagogue in Vienna, Austria. That side of the family came over when Germany took over Austria in 1938. They left, they went to Switzerland, then England, and then were able to come to the United States by 1941. And this is an interesting, if it weren't for the Hebrew, of course, you might not even know that this was a synagogue. And as right, everyone is aware well established as a Jewish community was. And in a lot of ways, my family was long time established. My great grandfather on that side had actually been was in the cavalry in World War I. Just a long family history in Austria, but of course, as Jews, it was always a little bit tenuous. And this is the inside of the synagogue. So those two sides of my family, the Chinese side that has been here for much longer time than the European side. I emphasize that especially because I think a lot of people imagine that, Eurasian families all come about as some kind of version of Miss Saigon with the white American coming to Asia and then bringing back a bride or things like that. And that is clearly not my family's, not my family's story, not my family's history at all. My parents met in UC Berkeley. They were both honor students that served on a particular committee, and they met that way. And there's a picture of them in mid 60s. It's in some ways a very typical, boring American story. If they weren't of different races, in some ways folks wouldn't actually be that interested in hearing it being told. But because my father is Ashkenazi and my mom was Chinese, the unique situation in Berkeley at the time enabled them to fall in love and to get married. And of course, they were married in 1966, which was still before interracial marriage was legal across the country. And as a matter of fact, when they first got married, they drove back east for graduate school, and they will tell stories about being concerned and worried about which states that they were willing to drive through because they thought they might be challenged and their marriage might be challenged. My mom did convert to Judaism before my parents were married. They were already going to get married, but as they were engaged, she did convert. She felt very strongly that her family's history was about being Chinese, and that my father's family history was about being Jewish. And her theology was quite broad, very ecumenical, and wanted to ensure that our family was the same, that we understood that we were, firmly planted in both sides. And interestingly, my father will sometimes say, if there was a way that he could have also converted to being Chinese, he would have done the same. The idea is that, right, both of them wanted to demonstrate and to recognize that they were fully becoming a part of each other's family stories. Of course, that's the thing about Judaism, is that you're able to join the peoplehood. Which is unique and pretty special. I have 4 siblings. So this is a picture at my parents' actually 25th wedding anniversary. We grew up in San Francisco, and we belonged to Sherith, Israel. We were not the only multi or biracial family in the congregation, but there weren't that many of us. And in addition, the fact that there's so many of us, we did kind of stick out. And people had always had a lot of very interesting assumptions about us, about who we were, about the kinds of things that we did. And I think people will often ask, and I think this is actually not just about being Chinese and Jewish, but it's about being biracial in general, that people will ask, like, what does it feel like? What is it, what does it mean? And what does it look like? And I think this is kind of what they imagine it looks like, or at least imagine what it feels like, that you have kind of two sides, the two identities, and they're kind of warring with each other. And at any given time, one, you have to rank them. One is more important than the other, that kind of a thing. But that thankfully was not my family's experience. It felt a lot more like this. And this is a picture from my bat mitzvah. You recognize the inside of Share with Israel. And of course, there are differences between my mom's family and my dad's family, but there's differences between every family, different kinds of cultures and things like that. There was, the race piece was one aspect of what that meant. But we were very fortunate that our family came together. We felt very whole. We felt very, that both sides of the family embraced each other, and that it was very positive. I think of being biracial, or being Chinese and Ashkenazi Jewish as similar to being like a daughter and a sister, right? That you're both all the time. And sometimes perhaps one is more pertinent to a particular situation than the other. But rarely, if ever, are they in conflict with each other. You are both things all the time. And you kind of can wear them naturally. Now, what does that mean, though, in terms of the kinds of things that my family did? I will recognize, of course, that we do things a little bit differently. The service that we had at Share with Israel would have looked like any other bat mitzvah service that you would have come to in the 80s. The celebration was a little bit different and unique, though. So we did have lion dancers at my bat mitzvah celebration. We had lion dancers at every bar bat mitzvah celebration, including my mom when my mom became bat mitzvah. And then, of course, at that point, my brother and one of my cousins had studied some lion dancing, and they did the lion dancing for her bat mitzvah celebration. This, again, is at Share with Israel. I actually think this is at my mom's bat mitzvah. But, we were very lucky growing up. Our parents told us that we were very lucky to have come from two long, rich traditions, and that we had both of these peoples, as our history and as our foundation. And we were also very lucky that they told us that sometimes people would challenge that there would be people who would say that, because my mom converted, that we can't really be Jewish, or because she's Chinese, that doesn't make any sense, that we're not Jewish and that I'm not Jewish, or that our family isn't as Jewish as other folks. And I think that was a really wise move on their part, because they knew that we would encounter people who would challenge us. And those people were sometimes our classmates in religious school or classmates in regular school, or sometimes they were religious school teachers. On occasion, there were even some clergy folks. And most of the time, people wouldn't say, you can't be Jewish. Most of the times the questions were based on people's curiosity. And, after talking a little bit, folks didn't necessarily reject us or our family, but it could still be very hurtful and harmful to be singled out in that way. But because my parents were very clear that may be the kind of thing that we encountered, when we did encounter it, then we knew it was the other person's problem. It wasn't actually a challenge to our identity. We knew who we were. We knew that other people might not understand it, or might think it's strange because it's not something that they ever heard of before. But that didn't change who we were. And I think because they prepared us for what we might encounter, I think that enabled us to be very clear about who we were. So the kinds of questions that people will sometimes ask or have asked throughout time: how did you get to be Jewish? Wait, you're Jewish? I thought your mom's Chinese. When did you convert? Were you adopted? Those are all sort of very common, or the last two very common assumptions. These are two of my favorites. You look like you might be kind of Asian, or no offense, but your hair looks like it is Asian. And then some others that I think were people trying to be kind and people trying to be inclusive, but I think did just the opposite. This was a woman, the first one was a woman, my second year of rabbinical school when I was serving a congregation in Cleveland, and sort of in the receiving line at the end of services, she said, "It doesn't matter where you're from, you can be just as Jewish as the rest of us." And other folks who are friends or colleagues, "You don't look Chinese, so I never even think of it." Now that when I introduce myself as rabbi, I tend not to get challenged. Folks still ask questions, but not challenged in the same kind of way. I became a rabbi. I studied, I actually, as a teenager, I became very active in my own synagogue community. I studied religious studies in college and thought about going into academia. My father suggested, "Why don't you think about rabbinical school?" And I thought, well, maybe that will help me in my path toward academia. But ultimately found that it was a very meaningful way to move through life. I actually took a number of internships and positions in rabbinical school, thinking that I could rule out congregational life. And here I am. So, I feel like it's a privileged way to move through life in a lot of ways, that I get to spend really significant, special moments with people, whether those moments are happy and joyous, or those moments are difficult and hard. I get to spend a lot of time talking about what our purpose is, what the point of life is, how are we trying to balance things that we need for ourselves and the things that we think that we may want to do or that we need for the world. So I feel very lucky to be here. I was one of 2 Asian students at the Hebrew Union College in New York. And people did actually get us confused. The other one, Rabbi Cantor, Angela Buckdahl, is a Rabbi Anna Cantor. She has a beautiful, beautiful voice. So that was one of the first times somebody said to me, it was like, "Oh, I know you. You're the Chazanit that I heard singing." And it was very clear to me that they were not talking about a past event with me. In the beginning of my career, I actually found that when I talked about being mixed race, I would get things like people welcoming me into the Jewish community, or I would literally I'd have sometimes, colleagues or leadership rolling their eyes, telling me things like, "Well, you knew this was going to be a problem," or complaining because they felt like I was complaining. So I didn't actually discuss it as much at the beginning of my career, but as time has gone on, I realize how important it is for me to talk about what it means to be a more racially diverse Jewish community. I've found over time that people hear me less as an exception to some kind of rule about who the Jewish community is, and that we're all recognizing that my story, as well as so many other stories, are representative of a much greater depth and complexity of the Jewish community. This is not a new thing. This is not a new aspect of Jewish life. This is a picture of my parents from last year. This is, they just celebrated their 55th wedding anniversary. And sure, 55 years, no question, within the grand scheme of Jewish history, that's not very long. But certainly within any of our lifetimes, that this is not something that is brand new. So we hear sometimes in the conversation about diversity that we want to be welcoming. Even to some degree, the term inclusive, although I use the term inclusive as well, right, suggests something about bringing people in. But I think what we are doing rather than being welcoming is we are recognizing who is already here. We are recognizing who already belongs. Some of us have been here a long time, and I think we're recognizing it more and more because the diversity is increasing, the diversity is growing. And that is because everywhere we have ever lived as Jews, we start to look like the people that we live amongst. And in the United States, what we know is right now in the Jewish community, this is from the most recent Pew report, and it says, right, in terms of the folks in Jewish households who recognize themselves to be a non-European race or multiracial. So the most sort of inclusive, the average would be about 17% of folks who would see themselves as, in the Jewish community, see themselves as multiracial or non-Ashkenazi. This is from the Pew report in 2017, and it shows, right, since it's been perfectly legal everywhere in the country to be able to marry somebody of a different race, it has been steadily increasing. So in 2015, approximately 10% of all couples, 17% of the newlyweds. Now, of course, this is across the country. So of course, in our region, this is also from, this is also from the 2017 Pew report, the total interracial marriage. This is not just amongst Jews, but this is in San Francisco, Oakland, Hayward region. The total interracial marriage rate was about 26. In our recent Portrait of Bay Area Jewish Life and Communities from 2018 that our federation sponsored, 25% of American Jewish households include a respondent or a spouse who's Hispanic, Asian American, African American, or mixed of other ethnic or racial backgrounds. So we had 26% in the general population and 25% within the Jewish world. So we are paralleling exactly the interracial and mixed race households and families and communities that are in the greater community, as well as in the Jewish community. And I think that's, again, significant because everywhere we've ever lived, we start to look like the people that we live amongst. And the reason I think that this is such an important and exciting thing to recognize is this is a more recent picture of the family and how it's expanded and grown. This was my son's bar mitzvah. He's turning 18, so it was about 5 years ago. Because I think it is symbolic of the fact that we are creating, that we are in the midst of creating, and that we have been creating a unique brand of Judaism, a unique kind of Judaism. When we start to look American in the ways that, other aspects of our country look American, I think that makes us, right, that puts us in line again with why Ashkenazi Jews look like they're Eastern European and Sephardic Jews look like they're from Spain and Portugal, and Mizrahi Jews are Arab essentially, right? That this is just a very visual and physical reminder of the fact that we are our own unique kind of Judaism, and that the nature of Judaism and the nature of Jewish history will forever be changed because of what we do here, because of who we are, because of the cultural kinds of practices that we create, because of the ideas that we share and the things that we write. And that, I think, is so exciting. And when we look at the diversity, I think it's a symbol of the fact that who we are is something new in the Jewish continuum. And that's, I think, something to really embrace and to get excited about and recognize that we are making our mark, and that it's significant to who we are now. It's significant to who Jews will be in the future, and not just in the United States, but to who Jews will be forever. Thank you for listening. Any questions or things? I'm open to answering anything or discussing further.
Thank you, Rabbi. Really appreciate you sharing the personal story that you've been on and your family's been on for a long time. I love the visuals. The photos of the families are incredible, and it just keeps growing and evolving. Really fascinating. Thanks so much. Please feel free, anybody, to unmute yourselves and ask a question or make a comment.
I'd like to ask a question and or make a comment. Actually, I think first of all, thank you so much for speaking and for showing what you've shown and telling what you've told. You said a couple of things that I'd like to hear more about. You were referring to the language of inclusion and welcoming, and to its limitations and some maybe less desirable implications. And also you were pointing at some possibilities of moving beyond that that conceptual universe. So I'd like to hear about from you, if you would give us a little bit more about both the limitations and problems with the idea of welcoming and inclusion, and also if you would elaborate on the vision of growing beyond that.
Thank you. Really great question. I mean, the term welcoming is, I think, the easiest term to kind of think about and to rethink, right? If you're welcoming, if you're being hospitable, there's insiders and you're welcoming outsiders. And I think that's the piece that, you know, at various points in this conversation, when I've heard people talk about, you know, the Jewish community needs to be more welcoming. And I kind of feel like, I mean, that's where I feel like looking around and being like, welcome who? I'm here. I've been here, right? My family's been here. This is not about welcoming outsiders. This is about understanding who we have already become. And I think inclusion, though I prefer the term certainly to welcoming, and I haven't decided yet what I like better than that necessarily. It also has a sense of there's right, that some folks have the power to be able to bring other people in, and I think that's what I'm hoping to challenge a little bit, is to say that we're all on equal footing. So how do we recognize who is here and who's a part of the group already? Some of the term inclusion, to some degree, when we're talking about the established Jewish community and we're talking about synagogues, that we are talking about that form of leadership or that form of Jewish community and organization, recognizing that we have not necessarily put ourselves on equal footing, and that we do have to start broadening our understanding of who Jews are in order that it should include everybody, so that our institutions and our establishments should include everybody. So I do prefer that instead. But I think it really is about recognition. It's about seeing who's here. It's about hearing the stories that are already here. It's new to some people because some people haven't been exposed. And there's lots of different, I mean, San Francisco is a different story than other parts of the country. And the East Bay is a different story than other parts of the country, for sure. And sometimes we'll go to national conventions, members of my community will go to national conventions, and people are just starting to realize the diversity they have in their communities, but that's also because the places that they live are just not as diverse as we are in the Bay Area. So in some ways we're in a different place, and it's a different conversation. But it is about I think just recognition of who we already are. And the more we talk about being welcoming, I think the more we demonstrate that we just haven't been paying attention.
Thank you, David, for that question. David and I have actually been talking about exactly this language. He's a Shabbat school educator at our program, and also doing lots of other ritual work with us. So David, thank you.
So it just along those lines, there's another term that I struggle with, and I have no expectation that en masse people will change, but just to something to think about. The term Jews of color, I actually find to be a problematic term, because it lumps all of us who are considered whatever, non-Ashkenazi or whatever the diversity is together. And the differences in the experiences between people of various races is so vast that it's often not helpful to lump us all together. And you wind up reducing the experience of this, real diverse community into one experience. And that doesn't help us, I don't think, in terms of recognizing overall diversity. And that certainly doesn't help us engage when we're engaging with an individual, because we can't assume that an individual has a particular experience based on what we've heard or what we understand other individuals to have experienced. So, I prefer terms that are more like, racial minorities in the Jewish community, or things that are a little bit more explicit, less poetic. I think people of color sounds very poetic, but I think that there's a danger to it. So just to raise a little awareness or thought on that. Sandra. You're still muted, Sandra.
Could you tell, you seem to have a large extended family. Could you tell us how you celebrate Shabbat?
How we celebrate Shabbat? I think we celebrate with challah and candles and wine or juice. We celebrate with a big meal. It's one of the nice things in some ways actually about the pandemic. I've done services from home, so I've been able to be home for Shabbat meals every week. But I think our celebration of Shabbat is very typical for, I think, an Ashkenazi style Jewish household. My husband is Ashkenazi. He grew up as a conservative Jew in Los Angeles. So of my siblings and his siblings, we are the only two that married somebody else who is also Ashkenazi. Everyone else is married. So the diversity in that picture, I mean, everyone is mixed, if not mixed race, mixed ethnicity. It's a great, I mean, I'm proud of it. It's a very great diversity, and also proud that all of the kids in that picture have become bar mitzvah or will become bar mitzvah. So we're very lucky.
Sounds very nice. So do you invite those who are not Jewish in your extended family as well?
Sometimes, I mean, I think if there's not, so that would be more when I was growing up. My grandparents were at many, my Chinese grandparents were at many Passover Seders. If they were with us on a Friday, we would certainly do the blessings, and they would be there as a part of it. So they're very accustomed to it. One of my cousins who's not Jewish, they put them at her wedding, they put them in chairs and kind of lifted them up. They didn't quite do a hora, but there was, I think, some influence there a little bit, but absolutely. And my greater extended family, all my cousins and things like that, they come to every bar mitzvah. They're have always appreciated and taken part in all of our life cycles and celebrations.
Very nice.
Thanks.
Kol hakavod.
Thank you. And likewise, we used to go over to my uncle's house when he got a Christmas tree, and we would sometimes help him decorate the Christmas tree, things like that. I mean, I think that's been an important piece of sharing holidays and traditions together. And I think it's clear, we know what is their tradition, what is his tradition and his family's, and we know what is ours. So can you tell me something about Beth Sholom and just what your conversations are and what your experience has been, and when you start to think about this question of diversity? And of course, diversity is not just about racial diversity. It can be much broader. Are there things that your community has challenged yourself with? Are there things that your community has tried to do differently? I'd be interested to hear about that too.
Well, anyone who is a member is accepted, no matter what background, if they're interested in coming and participating, they're welcome.
That's wonderful.
Who else has been around for a long time in the community? I haven't been an official part for so long. So the people who have a lot of history, can you explain?
Oh, I think we all have. 1, 2, 3, 4.
So Harriet,
5,
can you give us a little
6,
bit, like what in your
7,
memory, like what's been some of
8.
the hot, let's say even hot topics, or just like moments that you feel Beth Sholom kind of rose to the occasion, that stood up for something that, I mean, I know Rabbi Lou definitely had some powerful statements over his time. So yeah, what can you tell us? And then Jean, we see your hand, you'll be next.
Yeah, I would say welcoming gay members, I suppose. Otherwise, I don't really remember any issues. So
Thank you.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. I mean, I think we're the first congregation in the Bay Area to have a homosexual president. And I know I didn't think anything of it at the time, but now, I mean, in years later, people say, I had people say to me, oh, I couldn't come to the synagogue, when Kenny was president, because how could I bring my children there? And I'm thinking, I don't know, it was upsetting to hear this from people. And I just didn't know what to say, but I just I just accepted it and and moved on. I mean, I always felt that our president was there for all of us, for the good of our synagogue. I mean, I don't know, but and I would say that by and large, that although some people I'm sure were offended, a lot of people were not. I mean, a lot of people accepted it and moved on.
Yes, I couldn't even recollect exactly who you were talking about.
Oh, you didn't know who I thought? Yes, you know who I mean now.
Of course, I know who you mean once you said his name. Yeah, but I
Yeah.
was thinking I couldn't remember
you keep thinking,
identifying anybody as a gay president.
Right. Well, he was out, and there was
he
didn't hide it, and he was natural about it, and
He made such a great contribution to our synagogue. He taught Torah.
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, that's
He
the
did
power.
what had to be done.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the power
He
of
did the
it.
work, which
Yes.
most of the presidents, it's a tough job.
It's a tough job. My late husband was a
You're
president,
right.
so I
Yes.
know it was a tough job. I know it was a tough job. Yep. Thankless, tough and thankless, but
Mhm.
anyway.
And voluntary.
Totally voluntary. Sort of.
Paid position.
Ruth, did you want to say something?
Yes, we also have several interracial couples, and we're very, that's been just part of our synagogue. And we also have many couples or individuals who have converted to Judaism. So there's a whole big mix. And I think most of us or all of us are very accepting of everybody. And we're glad to have the diversity in our membership.
I feel, from what I've seen in recent years, I feel like our recent rabbis, the rabbis over the last 10 years have been wonderfully accepting of people who have chosen to become Jewish, and including Rabbi Russell, who has a class, and the other, and some of the other, kind of younger rabbis, I would say. I'm not saying that there are older rabbis who wouldn't do it, but it was a little bit different back then. I think by welcoming people who are interested in becoming Jewish, of course, no matter what their background, I think that is the best start for getting the congregation to be inclusive, be quote unquote inclusive, which is a word you don't really like, but I understand. But I have to say that I just think it's wonderful that there are that they do groups of people too, so that instead of individual counseling, and I'm not sure how, I'm not sure how it was done years ago. I do know people that did convert years ago, but and back in the day, well, yeah, I know a couple stories, but not anyway. It's just I think times have changed for the better. Not that they were ever bad, but I think things have gotten even better in that regard, in terms of welcoming people who want to become Jewish.
Just maybe as a point of interest, I've actually had double, if not more so, the number of folks coming to me for conversion since the pandemic started.
Really?
I don't know if you've had that same experience, but I think it's gotten people to think about the things that are important to them, and so people are seeking communities and seeking new homes. So yeah, it's interesting.
Is Amanda, are you there?
Yeah, I'm
Is that-
here. I'm here.
Have
Sorry.
you found that to
I
be
can't turn my
true at all?
camera on. It's too chaotic over here. But
I
but
understand.
yes, we have found, I mean, since I've been here officially 2 years, though obviously all of you, most of you know that I've been here longer than that. The class has doubled and tripled in size over the past year and a half. And I would just say, yeah, and I would just say one point to add is that I think from our perspective, this group of people who are mostly not interracial, right, or coming from a background where your Judaism was questioned, I think that some of our students do have a really hard time walking into the sanctuary for the first time. And part of that is new to Judaism, right? Not just necessarily because they look different or something like that, but I think but I spend time, I mean, Rabbi and I both spend time with students, just sort of like giving them the lay of the land before they have to come in on a Shabbat, because it's not an easy thing to walk in and you know, we're super welcoming. I agree with what everybody was saying, but it's sometimes an intimidating space to walk into for the first time. So we do a lot of work, you know, to try to help break down those barriers before they walk in, I would say. And but it's, you know, we're always learning, and it's definitely a work in progress.
Yeah. And I appreciate you saying that too, in terms of a work in progress. I do think that in general, one of the most important pieces of this for our communities is just to remain humble about it, that we don't know the answers. We might find, you know, ways of, you know, recognizing our diversity really well today, and tomorrow we're going to learn something new about how we have to kind of do things. And I think if there's one thing that I would encourage everybody to remember is just humility, and just to know that, you know, to do the best that you can, to know that you're going to make mistakes, and recognize the mistakes when you make them. We don't have to justify, you know, when we do things that are wrong, we're going to do things that are wrong, and keep learning and growing that way. I think that's actually a key in having the right kind of mindset to be able to continue to grow with our community.
Rabbi Mates-Muchin, I have a question. I'm really kind of been struck by the nuance between kind of accepting and recognizing that you had talked about, and I would say how have you recognized in your community, Temple Sinai, have you officially recognized people, given space for people to be recognized as opposed to simply accepted, which I think there are two really different things.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And I think there's different levels of it. So I think as clergy and as staff, I think some of the things that we know are most important is to remember people's names, right? And folks in particular who come from groups that tend to be marginalized, to remember who they are, to remember conversations that you've had with them, is really key to making people feel seen. And I think that's a lot of what it is, looking people in the eye. You know, we have stories of people who like wander the building on a Purim carnival and just felt like nobody even, you know, realized that they were there, right? In a day when the building's filled with hundreds of people, when we could do those kinds of things. You know, so I think stuff, just being super intentional about that and recognizing that I mean, this is the same as the greater conversation we have about equality and equity, is that some folks who come from traditionally marginalized groups are going to need a little more intentionality and a little more attention when it comes to things like that, remembering folks' names. I think what we're also trying to figure out is how, as a community, do we, you know, I think a lot of the conversations that happen that people have a very difficult time with are the things that are said at an oneg, are things where people are very well-meaning and they're just curious about somebody else's background or somebody else's Jewish story, but it gets asked in a way that winds up making somebody feel more isolated and not. It's not an outreach of friendship. Instead, it's sort of pushing somebody away by the way that questions are asked. And so we're also figuring out how do we, as a community, think about the things that we talk about together at an oneg, recognizing that we're all well-meaning. How do we, what are the kinds of questions that we want to ask of people when we meet them for the first time? Do we volunteer our own Jewish story before we ask for somebody else's? That kind of thing. So I think we are actually in a process of reinvigorating a task force that tries to think about what kinds of things are we going to charge our board to start to think about in terms of training, right? Training for teachers, training for leadership, lay leadership, board, more rigorous board trainings on, how do you intervene if you hear one congregant saying something to another congregant that feels uncomfortable, those kinds of things. So I think it's also empowering a greater group of people, making sure that it isn't just the clergy or the senior staff or the staff that is charged with, trying to create a space that feels and recognizes that everybody belongs. But how do we expand that out to more people?
Thank you. Any other questions from the community?
I don't know if this is related enough, but it came up in a discussion. I don't know when, maybe at Minyan, after Minyan once. I go to Minyan several times a week. I used to go in person, and we would sit afterwards and have a bagel and cream cheese and coffee, and we would talk. And one of the things that upsets people who have chosen to become Jewish is that when you go to actually, maybe Rabbi Russell was there when we talked about this. When you go for an Aliyah and you say your parents' name, it's always Abraham to Sarah. So right away, people know that you are a Jew by choice. And is it fair for that? Is it right that you be identified this way? Once you've become Jewish, why do they have to always have the same, why does it always have to be Abraham to Sarah? Maybe Amanda can explain it better. I'm kind of fluffing around here, but it's one of the things that bothers me. I listen for it, actually. I listen to the names, and now that I've become more aware of the problem. I've had people who have become Jewish who are upset that they have to do that. That by participating in the service, they identify themselves as being Jews by choice.
I think that's really insightful. I knew someone who grew up in a Jewish household with, Jewish parents whose names were Alan and Sally. And so she was, right, taught Abraham to Sarah.
True, that's true.
But what was interesting was that people always then, right, assumed that she had converted to Judaism and would ask her questions or pepper her with questions about it. So and I think it is, that is something to consider and to think about. I know I worked with one rabbi when I was in Buffalo whose practice it was to have students research and think about multiple characters and personalities in Torah and in the Bible, and to pick two that they felt like were significant. I had a student recently who felt incredibly close to her mother-in-law, and wanted to have her mother-in-law's name represented in that way. So I think that it sort of depends on the community, but I think that's really insightful that it winds up being for those who know about it, right? It could wind up being something that is a brand, and then that opens you up to people feeling like they can ask questions about what that means for you. Yeah.
Did you have any of those kind of feelings?
What you mean, that people would ask me kinds of questions and feel like they could ask whatever they wanted? Yeah. I think that's often, right, that people would say like, wait, how are you Jewish? Like literally, look, my mom was the first female Mohelet.
I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah.
I remembered that. I drove you to crew practice.
I know, I remember. I was hoping maybe we could catch up for a minute after.
Okay.
Yeah. So, my mom was very much out there. And so for those who, other folks in the Jewish community who knew her, it was, something that was known, but people would often ask her in college, that people would just feel like they could just how are you here? Or what is, or I think sometimes even people might ask a question like, what brought you here? But knowing for me, because I have often been asked or had often been asked that question, how did you become Jewish, that I heard it as, how are you Jewish? Even if it might have just been, oh, I came for Shabbat services, right? I mean, it could be, so that's where some of the sensitivity of sort of understanding what people are bringing with them, I think is a really important piece of it too. But yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you saw my family. 2 of my siblings belong to my congregation. My kids are 3/4 Ashkenazi. Their kids are 3/4 Asian. And, they are family members of the rabbi, and they sometimes get confused and things like that as well, right? I mean, it persists, it continues. So I think good questions to ask are, I think so. And I want to qualify too, when I say welcoming, you can welcome someone to your congregation, which is not the same as welcoming somebody to the Jewish people. Right. So there's a big difference there in terms of thinking about what that looks like. But yeah.
Thank you so much. We have time for one more question or comment if somebody would like to offer one up.
Can I just say, I really appreciate you all taking the time. I appreciate you engaging in the conversation and starting to work with me, with everyone on figuring out how we ensure that our communities are really communities of belonging for everyone who's a part of us. So thank you so much for being here and for your questions. And I'm not far away, so if there's ever a reason to reach out, please feel free.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. Thanks everybody for a great conversation. Appreciate the comments and the questions, and always learning more about Beth Sholom as these conversations occur. And I want to just make sure everyone is aware of the next Include Speakers series, which is the next 4th Sunday of August 22nd, with Rabbi Gershom Sizomu. If you don't know Rabbi Gershom, he is the spiritual leader of the Abudaya Jews of Uganda, and he's been on the docket at Beth Sholom for many years. Right before pandemic, he was actually supposed to come to Beth Sholom and have some time with us. So we're excited that he's finally going to make an appearance, and he will be zooming in from Uganda, I believe. So it's very exciting. And that's next Include, which is August 22nd. Please let people know that this is happening. I think everyone who came understands and realizes the importance of our community being a part of these conversations and hearing from incredible people in our community. Rabbi, thank you so much again for spending this time with us on a Sunday night. Learned a ton, and really want to get a chance to be with you somehow in person and experience the warmth and the community that you've built in Oakland. So
Thank you.
Erev Tov, Shavua Tov, everybody have a great week. And thanks you again for your time.